Hi, everybody. It's Julia, your trusted travel expert for Mathis and Travel. And I wanted to talk to you this week a little bit about Malaysia, where I've been for the past week exploring. And you might want to kind of wonder why Malaysia? Like, why did I choose to come here? Singapore, like I said last week, Singapore, you can go anywhere. And well, there's a couple different reasons why I chose to go up into Malaysia and the specific parts of Malaysia that I chose to do. So the first of which being when I was a couple of years ago when I started this grand travel adventure, I did several weeks in Southeast Asia, and my plan was to continue south from Thailand into Malaysia, see some of the things that I've seen this week, and then continue on to Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. But of course, I just ran out of time because there's way too much to see. I spent, a week on a beach in Thailand learning how to get my dive certification. And so I just didn't get the chance to cross down the border and come into the Malaysian peninsula. If you look at a map, Thailand sort of ends and then the Malaysian peninsula begins. And that's really where this part of Malaysia is. They also have part of one of the larger islands, the Malaysian Borneo. That's another part of Malaysia, but I didn't get to that one this time, maybe next time. But so in the peninsula itself, there are all kinds of course, different interesting things you can check out. I had originally thought that I was going to go spend some time diving because there's apparently some really lovely diving. But the East Coast, and again, this was sort of bad planning on my part, the East Coast is in monsoon season. I mean, the whole kind of country is in monsoon season, but really the East Coast and especially the dive resorts are pretty much shut down in December through February. So that ruled those out. And then the West Coast, which is where I've sort of been, is actually really fascinating historically, just because being on the West Coast, they are sort of the next thing west from there is India. So they've always sort of been trading ports, whether, up from similar to Singapore. Before Singapore was Malacca was the big Dutch headquarters for their spice trade. North of Malacca was Penang or Georgetown, and that was sort of I think the British answer before Singapore took over the sort of traffic, and even before the Europeans came, the Indians came across, the Chinese came down, both via land and via sea, and so there's just historically and culturally lots of really interesting stuff. So then the third thing was time, because I'd already been to Kuala Lumpur, even if it was just for a couple days. I only had sort of the work week to work with to get away from Singapore. And so I had to pick places that had easy flights in and out of Singapore. And so that became really easy. I made it up to Georgetown, which is a quick hour flight from Singapore. Spent a couple days there. And Penang is the island, but Georgetown is the main city, but everyone just kind of calls it Penang. So that's what I'm going to refer to it from now on, Penang. And then there's another island just north of that, really close to the Thai border, that I really wanted to get to, Langkawi. That's supposed to be a really beautiful beaches and stuff, especially for the West Coast, which again doesn't have as pretty of beaches as the East Coast of the peninsula does. But I didn't have time to make it up to Langkawi, so I just did Georgetown, and then I went into the center of the country to learn a little bit more about the British influence and some of it was founded, this area, the Cameron Highlands, was founded because of tin mining, but you wouldn't know that today. It's all tea plantations and strawberry farms and other kinds of agricultural farms. So Georgetown to the Cameron Highlands was a really easy bus ride. It ended up being about 5.5 hours because our bus had a little bit of technical issues along the way, but it's even a shorter drive if you want to hire a private driver, which is actually really affordable to do. And then also the Cameron Highlands is just a quick couple hour trip down to another really interesting city, Ipoh, which I hope to kind of at least drive through this afternoon. And Ipoh is another quick hour flight down to Singapore. Direct flights on Tiger Air each of my flights were, $60 to $70 or something like that. So it was really easy and really affordable, and it has been really awesome. If you following along on my pictures, Penang is really a food city, big time, because of all the molding of cultures. The Indians coming over, the Chinese coming down, and then the Europeans coming in which they don't really influence the food, thank goodness. There's so much amazing food, and also, again, somewhat like Singapore, but in a much smaller scale, really interesting cultural mix, because there's this one particular street that sort of kind of goes right down the center of the old town of Penang. And there's a Christian church there is at one end and a mosque at the other end. And this is sort of the Indian Muslims that came over, less Arabic Muslim, but it's still Muslim. And then in between, there were different Hindu temples and Chinese temples. So, that's 4 different major religions on one particular street. And as you can imagine, there are restaurants to go with the people that populate those religious centers all over the place, and delicious melding of influences. You even have some Thai influence in the curries up there. And none of these curries are super spicy. There is Indian food, especially, is always going to get a little spicy for you. But I mean, just really rich and super flavorful, kind of like what I talked about last week with Singapore. Just amazing, amazing food. And then up in the hills, the Cameron Highlands. Sorry, I'm looking outside because it's raining a little bit, and it's just so atmospheric and beautiful. They are, this, like I said, they started mining tin up here, but the British, when they were stationed in Malaysia, and this is really like later than the turn of the century. This has really only been developed since the mid-1920s, this area. But the British soldiers needed somewhere to cool off because it's so hot and humid in most of Malaysia and any of the ports or places they were camped, that they would come up here to cool off. They actually even have, lots of kind of redone barracks. All the buildings up here, or the older buildings up here, are like sort of faux Tudor. I mean, you can see the room behind me with the kind of oak beams and stuff like that. And it's really quaint. And in fact, this particular hotel serves, has a lot of British influenced food. Fish and chips, that kind of thing, afternoon tea, scones, all that kind of good jazz. But then again, all the workers in the tea plantations, they're almost all Indian or Indian descent. And so there are amazing Indian restaurants around. There's Hindu temples dotted all over, like all the tea plantations have their own little mini temple. There, of course, are some Chinese here and stuff. The thing about the Cameron Highlands that's actually really interesting is, and I've heard this from several different drivers and people I met, the Western tourist trade is really kind of going down. But the local tourist trade, the Indonesian and Malaysian tourists, and probably even some Thai tourists, that is just exploding. I mean, the town, sort of the main town, there are 2 main towns, bigger towns in the Cameron Highlands, in the mountain valley range. And the one town has these huge high-rise hotels and these huge condo buildings and stuff that they're building, because every weekend and every school holiday, it is packed to the brim with Malaysians that come up for the weekend or for the holiday, and they go to strawberry farms, they go to honey farms. I mean, there's farm, and it's very touristy. But again, focus more on the Indonesian or Malaysian tourist. So it's kind of interesting. I've sort of camped out at this hotel. It's really sort of been my home away from home while I'm here. And it's been really great and really relaxing and a cool respite from the heat of Penang and Singapore and the rest of the area. And of course, it's been beautiful. Lots of great hiking, lots of really interesting natural places. One of the kind of forests I explored yesterday was a cloud forest that is shortly going to be a national park. So that's good because it'll protect it, and it's just beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful cloud forests I've ever seen. So there's great diversity, there's great food, and really interesting history and cultural mix. So that is why I chose to explore some of Malaysia, and why I think that anybody wanting to get a little bit off the beaten track from some of the more popular Asian spots, Southeast Asian spots, would be wise to choose and consider Malaysia. So that's it for this week. I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.